Hello, and welcome to today's session of Careers Beyond Academia, which is a series hosted by the Stem Cell Network and Medicine by Design. My name is Stephanie Hume, and I'm the Director of Academic Programs and Partners at Medicine by Design, which is CCRM's academic research division. We're thrilled to be co-hosting this series with the Stem Cell Network, and our goal is to expose as many trainees as possible to different careers that are available after a degree in the life sciences, and to start to understand the qualifications and experience necessary to secure these roles. This series has already highlighted a wide variety of careers over the last several years, and so you can see past session recordings on Stem Cell Network's YouTube. And today we're excited to have two speakers who will tell us about their careers in technology transfer and IP. Before we get started, I'd just like to highlight that Medicine by Design and Stem Cell Network have other training programs, so please check out our website for events and programs that are coming up. And I would like to just highlight one program that I think would be of interest to this particular group, which is Summer by Design. This is a program that we're hosting in partnership with Stem Cell Network as well, and it will run this June, from June 8th to 17th in person in Toronto. And it's an 8-day program for PhD students and postdoctoral fellows from Canadian and international universities, where you'll learn about all aspects of commercialization of regenerative medicine from expert-led interactive sessions. And so applications will be opening in the next week, so please check out our website for more information on how to apply for that, or if you have any questions about the program, feel free to just reach out to me. A couple housekeeping notes on the session today before we get started. We'll have our two speakers give about 10-minute presentations, and that portion will be recorded. And then we will have a panel discussion and Q&A at the end, which will not be recorded. So please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand using the raise hand function in Zoom, and we'll call upon you to unmute and ask your question at the end. Now, with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for the day. Or actually, before we get started, I just wanted to highlight both of our speakers. So we have Julia Antoniw, who is a technology transfer officer at the University of British Columbia. And following that, we'll have Chris Leclerc, who works for Intellectual Property Ontario. So our first speaker today will be Julia, and she is a technology transfer officer at UBC, working at the intersection of science, entrepreneurship, and intellectual property. She evaluates technologies for their commercial potential, guides intellectual property strategy, and supports the translation of research into real-world impact. She holds a master's degree in chemical engineering from UBC, where she researched bio-based nanomaterials as property modifiers for adhesives. Prior to joining UBC, she held roles across industry and academia, including supporting the pertussis vaccine manufacturing process at Sanofi Pasteur and researching polymer stabilizers at Queen's University. And with that, I will pass it over to Julia to share your screen and give your presentation. Thanks.
I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Great. And I'll just, Chris, you and I can just go off camera while Julia gives her presentation.
Are you able to see my presentation slides?
Not yet.
Nope.
There we go. Looks great.
So firstly, I just want to say thank you to Stem Cell Network, CCRM, and Medicine by Design. I am really excited to get a chance to speak to you today about my current role and the path that I took to get here. So I am currently a technology transfer officer at the University of British Columbia. I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Queen's University, and then I have a master's in chemical and biological engineering from UBC. So my career timeline starts in 2015 at Queen's. I started Bachelor of Sciences, and then when I start my second year, I major in life sciences and chemistry. After the second year, I volunteer as a research assistant in an inorganic chemistry lab, which sparks my interest in doing research but doesn't sell me on the inorganic chemistry component. So when I start third year, I decide I want to work in pharmaceuticals. I start taking some of the prerequisite courses to do a PharmD, and I apply for an internship in May at Sanofi Pasteur, which is a vaccine manufacturer with a large site in Toronto. The posting was looking for a chemical engineering student, but at this point, I'd been taking a lot of classes with chemical engineering students, so I thought, why not? I'm at Sanofi for a year, working in the manufacturing technology and pertussis vaccine production. The company was really good at exposing interns to all the different types of roles that exist in the pharmaceutical ecosystem. And it's because of that exposure that I realized that all the jobs that I thought were really interesting, jobs involved in strategy, jobs involved in decision-making, were being done by people with graduate level degrees. And so at this point, I start thinking about going to graduate school. I wrap up my internship in April, and then I have 4 months before I'm starting my last year of university. I'm applying to all sorts of jobs when the chemical engineering department at Queen's sends out a posting advertising a research assistant position in polymer reaction engineering. Again, I think the position was probably looking for a chemical engineering student, but so was Sanofi, so I apply anyways, and I work in that lab all summer. This was a big aha moment for me because I found the work really interesting, and I decided that I wanted to keep learning and working in this area. So I dropped my life sciences major. I spoke to the Associate Dean of Chemical Engineering and thought about switching into engineering. She said, however, that it would add an extra 2 years to my degree. So I said, thanks, but no thanks. And I graduated with a major in chemistry. However, I'm not dissuaded at this point from engineering. So I apply and decide to do a master's in chemical and biological engineering at UBC. I sign on to work on a project in collaboration with my supervisor from Queen's, and I do industry-sponsored research into incorporating bio-based materials into adhesives to improve their performance. I learn a lot from this role, but after about a year and a half, I decide I want to get some more work experience before I commit to a PhD. And so I start applying for jobs. I'm super interested in, but don't meet all the requirements for a technology transfer role that gets posted at UBC. But a postdoc in my lab really encourages me to apply anyways. And so in August 2022, I start as a tech transfer officer supporting the physical sciences and IT at UBC. Looking back at all these decision points, I remember feeling so much uncertainty as I jumped around trying to pick a career. And it's only in hindsight that I can kind of see now how this path set me up for success in a role where I'm now required to be adaptable and jump into topics that I'm unfamiliar with. So before I talk about my role specifically, I want to talk a bit about what actually is tech transfer. If we were in person, I would have said, raise your hand if you've ever heard about it, but I'm just going to assume that not everyone here is familiar with the area. So technology transfer is the process of how research and ideas make their way into new products and services that benefit society. It doesn't necessarily need to be at a university, but most universities have TT offices because there's a high concentration of research and development happening at these institutions. The reality is that there's a lot of excellent work happening at universities, but universities don't have the capacity to commercialize inventions on their own. And so instead they do this through collaborations with industry partners. So the process starts with an invention. This is a unique or novel device, method, composition, idea, or process. And these invention disclosures get submitted to the Technology Transfer Office. We then undertake an evaluation of the commercialization potential, which also includes evaluating the intellectual property. If we think there's an intellectual property position, we might file a patent, a copyright, or a trademark application. The next step is then to find a partner to take this technology to market. So this can involve marketing to industry or supporting researchers in forming a startup, either of whom can then acquire a license to the intellectual property. Licensing technologies out to industry partners or startups is how we derive the greatest impact from technologies, whether that be because a new company has been formed, a new job has been created, or because it results in the existence of new products, services, or processes. So in the cycle that I just described, I'm now going to talk to you about my role as a tech transfer officer. So on my team, there are 3 tech transfer officers, one supporting physical sciences and IT, one supporting life sciences, and one supporting physical sciences, medical devices, and digital health. So the background for this role would depend on the portfolio you're supporting, but generally it's a graduate degree in a STEM field. So the officer supporting life sciences has a PhD in immunology, while I'm supporting physical sciences and IT, and I have a master's in chemical and biological engineering. The potential salary range for this role is between $80,000 and $130,000 a year. And in one sentence, if I had to describe what I do, I would say I support the translation of research into new products, policies, and practices through licensing or the formation of startup companies. The key skills that you need, I would say, firstly, would be a scientific knowledge base, which you typically would get from that graduate level degree. And then you also need to be able to communicate really clearly and effectively, both in writing and verbally. There's also a critical thinking and adaptability component because you're constantly switching between different topics that you need to learn about and be able to speak about. And then lastly, it would be kind of a learning mindset. So the skill of picking up and understanding new topics quickly. I may not understand a new topic to the level of the PhD researcher in that area, but I can understand it enough to summarize it and talk about the main ideas. But I also think it's important to mention that the skills that make you a good fit for this role are different than the skills that you would acquire in the role, and that's because there's a lot of on-the-job training. So I would say it took me almost a full year before I was operating at the full capacity of the role, and that's because it has a super broad scope. So the role really sits at the intersection of like law, business, and science. And so though I was coming in with a strong science foundation, I really had to learn the business and the law components. And then lastly, as you could kind of see from my career slide, so I also considered going to pharmaceuticals And I also considered maybe being a material scientist before this. So a typical week for me will involve meeting with researchers to learn about what they're working on. This can either be through one-on-one meetings or attending a research day or symposium put on by a department. And then once I feel that I have a good grasp of the invention, then starts the work of assessing the commercialization potential. So this is a combination of assessing the strength of the intellectual property and the market need. If no matter how cool an invention is, if no one wants to buy it, it's not going to make it to market. And so both of these components are going to factor into my assessment. Excuse me. The next step then involves searching the literature and patent databases to assess the best form of intellectual property. So whether this could be a patent, a copyright, or a trademark. All this searching then will accumulate in having a lot of information, which then I distill down into a report summarizing the IP position and commercialization landscape. I would then present this information to my manager, and we would work together to come up with a strategy and then provide recommendations and next steps to the researchers. This could include, we could file a patent, this research is too early, but please keep us updated as you continue along. Or if the researchers are interested in forming a startup, it's at this point that we act as a liaison, connecting them with the correct programming and funding sources that would help them to target accelerating this technology. So really, this will be an iterative process, and we'll often meet with the inventors multiple times over the course of working through the technology. Another part of this role is drafting, reviewing, and negotiating agreements. So this could be non-disclosure agreements, revenue sharing agreements, interinstitutional agreements, or simple licensing agreements. And then there's also a marketing component. So for technologies that don't have a clear industry partner or for whom the researchers are not interested in forming a startup company, in those cases, I would take the technology and prepare a one-page tech brief. I'd then compile a list of companies that we think might be interested, identify relevant contacts at those companies, and then reach out either via cold email or a warm introduction if the professor is already associated with the company, and try to set up a meeting to speak with these potential partners. So this has a twofold benefit. First, it helps to increase the visibility of these technologies, but then also it gives us valuable insight into the technology area that we might not otherwise have had access to. And then the final component of this role, I would say, is education. So educating researchers, educating students, and helping them to understand what is and how to protect intellectual property, and then providing guidance through the licensing process. So this is really a service-based role, and we're here to support researchers. Moving on to highlights, opportunities, and challenges. So I think my role is important because technology transfer really is the pipeline for deriving public value from publicly funded research. So my role helps to move research into things that people can access, whether this be clean tech, climate solutions, better manufacturing tools, novel hardwares or softwares. And then on a larger scale, I would say the work that I'm doing helps to strengthen Canada's innovation economy. Why I enjoy this role is the breadth of the work. As you could kind of see from the last slide, there's lots of different components to the role that do span like business, law, and science. And so I like that I'm constantly doing new things and learning new skills. There's also a continuous learning aspect to it. And I think really because this role is academia adjacent. And so I see that as you're still embedded in the academic ecosystem and you spend a lot of your time learning about new ideas, new technologies, new inventions, but you're not directly conducting the experimental work yourself. And then the last component that I really like is that it's relationship-driven work. So you have to have good relationships with industry, you have to have good relationships with the researchers, and you also have to have a good relationship with your team because you're often working collaboratively to develop these commercialization strategies. And so coming from lab work, which was really solitary, I really enjoy that this is now more of like a people-facing role. What I would describe as a challenge associated with this role is that you can't be an expert in everything. So the physical sciences and IT portfolio that I support encompasses chemical engineering, materials engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, computer engineering, physics. Like I'm not an expert in all these areas, but I think that the way that you address that is that through graduate studies, you become a specialist in one area. And then for this role, you need to really be more of a generalist, but you pick up all these skills while you're becoming a specialist. So you learn how to read papers, you learn how to distill information, you learn how to communicate ideas, present findings, and to communicate clearly. And all these things then you can apply generally to any research area, not necessarily the area you trained in. So future career trajectory opportunities for this role. So you can either grow within the team, you could become a manager, associate director, director, or you could move out into industry. And there's a similar type of role that exists in whether that's under the title of commercialization manager, partnerships manager, alliances manager. I think this role also has a lot of really similarities to being a VC analyst, where you're working with really early stage companies and trying to decide if you're going to be investing in them. Or if you're really interested in the intellectual like property and law side, you can go and become a patent agent. Lastly, I guess to leave you with some career advice, I alluded to this a bit at the start, but I would say firstly, don't count yourself out. I was not perfectly matched to the preferred qualifications for this TTO role, and I applied anyways. I often think framing your experience goes a really long way in helping you secure a role that you're maybe not perfectly qualified for. And then the second thing I would say would be to start relationships by leading with generosity and keeping the focus on what you can do for others, not necessarily what they can do for you. So like when networking and interviewing, consider what you might have to give. Could it be advice? Could it be a suggestion, access, a recommendation, a proactive introduction? Like don't only focus on what you're trying to get out of interactions, but what you can contribute to them. And then if this talk has convinced you that tech transfer is for you, a TT-specific career advice would be, firstly, see if the tech transfer office at your university takes on students, either for an internship or a work learn or shadowing opportunity. And then if that isn't an option, then there's AUTM, which stands for the Association of University Technology Managers. So this is a non-for-profit organization that supports professional development and education in this profession. And they host conferences that you're... not sure if this is still sharing, but I'm kind of wrapped up anyways. Anyways, AUTM hosts conferences that you're able to attend. I attended one right at the start of when I was working in this role. And it was really good for kind of setting a foundation for the skills that you need to work in academic tech transfer. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Julia, for sharing your experience and all. That was fantastic advice. As a reminder to the participants, if you have any questions for Julia, please pop them in the Q&A at the bottom, and we will get to them after Chris's talk. So with that, I will introduce our second speaker, Chris Leclerc. Chris holds a Master's of Engineering Science Master's of Engineering Science degree in Biomedical Engineering from Western University, where he conducted research in the labs of Dr. David Hess and Dr. Lauren Flynn. He currently serves as the Manager of Data and Operations at Intellectual Property Ontario, where he's part of a dedicated team supporting Ontario-based innovations and researchers in transforming their ideas into real-world success. Before joining IPON, Chris was the manager of the Venture Studio program at the Accelerator Centre in Kitchener-Waterloo. And in this role, he helped design and launch a $13 million program through FedDev Ontario, which supported 100 high potential ventures with mentorship up to $100,000 in non-dilutive funding and other critical startup services. His efforts contributed to the growth and success of numerous startups in the region and across Canada. Chris, please go ahead and share your screen, and I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Just making sure everything's looking okay. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Looks great.
You see it? Okay, awesome. Yeah. All right, thank you, everyone. So first off, thank you so much to Stem Cell Network for giving me an opportunity to speak at this event. It wasn't so long ago I was actually experiencing the same feelings of trying to transition from academia and get into a professional role. And so it's great just to have an opportunity to kind of speak a little bit on my experience and how I navigated it. There we go. So my current position is the Manager of Data and Operations at Intellectual Property Ontario. So Intellectual Property Ontario, or IPON for short, is a government provincial agency based out of Kitchener-Waterloo with a satellite office in Toronto. So what we do is we provide intellectual property services to small to medium-sized enterprises, as well as post-secondary education institutions across Ontario. We do that through a variety of different intellectual property services, such as IP education, IP benchmarking, IP funding, of which we provide grants for our clients to be able to access and protect their intellectual property assets through the gaining of IP rights. So my degrees and credentials, I started off as an honors specialization physiology and pharmacology at Western, and then moved to biomedical engineering. And I also hold a certificate in project management from the University of Toronto. All right, the journey of how I actually got here. So I started off in the honors specialization in physiology pharmacology, always had the dream, potentially med school or dentistry, just that professional designation. as I moved through the years, I kind of realized that maybe that wasn't me. That was just kind of a societal pressure to move into one of these roles with the accolades. So I ended up not pursuing that. I took a year off after my undergrad. I lived in Australia for 8 months and did some travel all across Southeast Asia and Oceania, which was amazing. If you have an opportunity to take some time off after school, please do. It sets so much perspective and gaining that when you go back to the professional world. After that, I came back and started my master's degree in biomedical engineering. So I was studying regenerative stem cell type with a biomaterial and trying to apply that to peripheral arterial disease. I actually had the opposite experience to Julia. I found it was a little bit too narrow in focus and realized that research wasn't for me. Spending months kind of in front of a screen writing the thesis was just probably the worst experience I've ever had. So I ended up deciding I didn't want to stay in research and wanted to try transitioning out of it. So that's when I started to look at other opportunities within Western. There was a course offered by the Tech Transfers Office, which was known as World Discoveries at the time, in partnership with Ivy Business School. And they were doing a graduate student innovation scholars, which you learned a lot more about business, about intellectual property, about how to commercialize technology, things like that. And I found it super fascinating. So I started to participate in those. I did some pitch book competitions. I started to kind of look into more of the consulting piece of that as well. And then quickly realized that's what I wanted to go into. So I had a really good friend that was commercializing his master's innovation. And he was actually part of an accelerator tech incubator based in Kitchener-Waterloo, which was the Accelerator Centre. So I ended up getting connected with them and they had a role open. So I fell into that as a coordinator of programs and client experience. This was a client facing role. You got to work with all the variety of different clients that this accelerator was working with and help kind of provide services and guide them along their way, their commercialization journey. So after 2 years of doing that, I moved up to the manager of the Venture Studio program. So Stephanie talked a little bit about this. It was a $13 million project or program under a Venture Studio model, of which we applied a variety of non-dilutive funding, as well as other services to help grow these companies. When that program wrapped up nearing the end there, I jumped over to Intellectual Property Ontario, which was at the time a very new provincial agency, I think around a year old. Serving about 40 SMEs across Ontario, and worked with them to help design some of their early programs, some of their early data and systems, and then moved up to a manager role where we are now serving over 1,200 clients. So in terms of a quick glance at the role, it's a little bit difficult because the manager role can look very, very different depending on the agency you're operating within. So I'd say a typical background tends to be a post-secondary degree. Can be an undergrad, can be a master's, can be a PhD, kind of it varies. But the professional experience is probably the most important part. So I'd say 5 to 7 years for at least a manager role. Certifications and designations are also a value, but it really depends on the role or agency. Most government job postings are standardized to a certain extent. So you can look at certain certifications and designations that may be needed for them. So if you are of interest of something like this, I would look into those. Some specializations that are important potentially are business administration, public administration, finance, or discipline specific to the sector of the government agency. I'd say take that with a grain of salt because I jumped from a biomedical science degree. So sometimes it's not always needed, but it really depends on the role. In terms of potential salary range, it's government, so everything's public. You can look up most of the salaries. So I would say the range goes from 90,000 to 140K, but it really depends on the size of the team and the agency that you're operating under. In terms of what I do in a sentence, so I manage data and operational processes by designing, optimizing systems, integrating processes, and leveraging data insights to drive efficiency, compliance, and informed decision-making across the organization. So a lot of buzzwords, kind of feels like a LinkedIn summary, but essentially what I do is I'm using data to help guide operations and processes and helping design systems for overall program and service delivery. Some of the key skills, I would say I've grouped them under three groups. So data and systems, so anything related to data management and governance, something I picked up in my master's, like reporting and analytics. So all those stats courses that you absolutely despise going through your undergrad and master's, they are actually important. So you will be dusting off some of those skills within a role like this. Client management system, so software like Salesforce, HubSpot, pretty much every corporate group or government group uses a version of this. So understanding those and how they work is important. Process automation and efficiency, and as well as various tools. So I'd say 95% of my work is probably done within the Microsoft suite, but just trying to understand different tools and services that I can apply within my role. Other than that, operations and process. So project management is a huge one. I suggest everyone that's kind of looking into operations take some certification or like continuing studies on project management, just because it's so useful. And that aligns with change management as well. And then something recently that's become a bit more important is just the leadership and people aspect. So I have a team of 4 people. Our overall team is about 30, so not a huge team. Small but mighty, but just better understanding communications, team leadership, and stakeholder management. So as we operate between the post-secondary education group, we operate between the ministry, we operate between small to medium-sized enterprises. There's a lot of different stakeholders that require different communications. In terms of other careers I considered, I was thinking about maybe operations in an adjacent field. Similar to Julia, I thought about pharma at one point, but decided to not jump into that. Management consulting was a big one that I found was super fun and dynamic. So was potentially going to go down that route. And then project manager, looking into my project management professional designation, as well as founder. So eventually I'd like to jump onto the other side and potentially start a business and try and grow it here in Ontario. In terms of typical activities, this one's a little bit difficult for the overall manager role because it just looks so different. No 2 weeks look the same. It's actually one of the things I like most about my job. It typically goes with the government cycle, the fiscal year, depending what the priorities are for reporting, as well as our system integrations and things like that. It's a mix of virtual and person work because we do have the 2 offices. We are moving back full to office starting in January, so we'll be primarily in person if that's something you're of interest in. The typical focus is on process improvements, data collection and reporting. So basically all the skills I mentioned on the previous slide, it just works within the overall cycle depending on what's important or prioritized at the time. Moving over to highlights, opportunities, and challenges. So why my role is important. So Ontario has become a leader in Canada for raising awareness and building capacity for the intellectual property and data-driven economy. That's actually a quote from Jim Balsillie, who was one of the panel of experts that formed our organization. And I believe that this role gives me an opportunity to support our innovation ecosystem and homegrown research and development. It's amazing the technology that's being spun out of universities, being spun out of these smaller organizations, things that you may be developing within your own lab that have huge commercial potential either within Canada or through some other jurisdictions around the world. Why I enjoy my role. So I put down dynamic and fast pace, which typically people don't believe falls within a government role, but we are a new organization, about 3 years old. So we tend to have kind of more of a startup mentality when it comes to like growing and trying to develop our services, which means it's very dynamic and fast paced. It feels like I'm in a startup sometimes in that sense. So some of the challenges associated with the role, I would say the unknowns. We obviously do follow the typical government cycle. So sometimes you have to monitor budgets, you have to monitor whether or not intellectual property will be important downstream. So there's a little bit of unknown with most government roles, but it's pretty well managed across the organization. In terms of future career trajectory or opportunities for the role, I would say I'm more of a generalist when it comes to operations. So one of the big things would be growth within the organization or jump to another private sector within operations elsewhere. You build a ton of different skills being within your master's or PhD and then moving over to something that's a little bit more operationally focused. All right, for career planning advice, I took a little bit of a different approach with this. I would say engage in the things you find interesting within the university. Most are available for free and are lost on graduation. There was actually a few other things I wish I engaged with more so within university that you instantly lose once you graduate. So make sure you do that before you leave. Get a feel for the industry you are interested in by attending events or reaching out to established professionals. Most will give you advice and tips willingly or just for your time. So I reached out to a few groups, just bought them a coffee, picked their brain for 30 minutes and was able to learn a bunch about their respective industries. The next one is understand the job market and future trends. So reassess if new certifications or designations are required or are high value for your industry. So things change, trends change. Just try and keep on top of that and understand if there's new shiny certifications that you can get that will give you an edge over other applicants. Most roles, including government, do look for these. It's very important. And then the final point is just invest in yourself, focus on what you enjoy, and don't be afraid to pivot. So I always say slow down, kind of enjoy it. Don't be worried about what you're doing in 20 years because you haven't figured out what you're doing, in the immediate future. So give yourself a chance to get there, invest in yourself, and really focus in on what you enjoy. So the final slide I have here. So when I was going through a lot of my masters, there was like a general feeling of just kind of being lost and not sure what I wanted to do after academia. You don't get a lot of insight into a lot of different career routes, and you don't really hear from the corporate world or different industries on what they do on a day to day. So what I found helpful is there's plenty of free resources to better understand yourself and like what makes you tick as an individual or what makes you uniquely you to help identify careers that you would excel in based on your personality. So I've included one here, 16 personalities. It's free as far as I know. It's been a while since I've actually done it. But it produces a report that when I got mine, it was just bang on to who I was as a person. And it let me understand some of the things that maybe I knew, but I didn't like actively know. It was kind of just buried in my subconscious. So I say do that if you have an opportunity to. And then those unique values and personality traits should really align with your goals, right? So there's different metrics such as like freedom, creativity, growth, stability, work-life balance, diversity of work, influence, and connection. And each of these are a spectrum that you'll be interested in, or stuff that you will not like, and focus on both because they're both equally important. So things like freedom, right? So if you like freedom, maybe like a startup environment or like an early business is something that you'd like to do because you tend to wear a lot of hats. Maybe you like to be a little bit more governed and have things watching over what you do. And maybe a larger organization would be more impactful for you. Things like work-life balance or connection, right? So if you don't enjoy speaking with people, probably don't take like a sales job because you're not going to enjoy that aspect of it. So really understand your personal values, understand what makes you tick. So when you're applying to roles or being interested in an industry, you can align those values with that. And then the final point is experience updates your values. So just make sure you're continuously revisiting your values when you feel stuck in a role or looking to move positions, because those experiences and the things that you do and do not like will continuously be updated. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Chris. Then that was great and a lot of great advice there at the end. Before we start the Q&A portion, I'd like to take a moment to thank both our speakers today for your fantastic talks.